Capitol Hill Occupy protest.
And this is Pride and Protest.
After the outcry and protest over George Floyd.
Third week of protests.
Protesters showing no signs of leaving this 6-block area.
So thou, O Son of Man, I have set thee a watchman unto the house of Israel.
Protest. That seems to be the new buzzword that's going around right now. Right now, when you turn on your TV, they're talking about a protest. You get on Facebook, they're talking about a protest. You turn on your radio, they're talking about another protest. What does it mean, a protest? If you open up your dictionary, you see that a protest is pretty much a declaration or a disagreement that you have with somebody's words, with somebody's actions, society at large, a government. There's a pretty wide definition of protesting. So what does the Bible say about protesting? Did anybody in the Bible protest? Did Jesus protest? Is there a time that Christians are supposed to be protesting? Was there a recent time that people were protesting? Right now, I would like to turn it over to my brother, and he'll tell you about the first protest that ever happened in the Bible.
Yes, as Brother Eden was talking about protests, protest has a history that took place actually in heaven. The first person to create or to lead or to start a protest was the devil himself. Before he was called the devil, he was called Lucifer, the covering cherub. A covering cherub is an angel which is placed in authority to cover the word of God. But then, in his protest, he spread rumors and lies about that God is unjust, that he can do a better job, and he wanted to take the place of God himself.
Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth, and I have set thee so. Thou wast upon the holy mountain of God. Thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day that thou wast created, till iniquity was found in thee.
A protest is also uprising and to spread disbelief or to pick it causes a decision in sides being chosen. Which are you going to follow, God, or are you going to follow the lies? And as a result, he had lost his position of being the covering cherub, and then he was cast down to the earth. And then today, he causes protest and strife to take place amongst men. And even as a result, it even causes confrontation, it causes hurt, it causes destruction. As you can see, the protest is very violent, causes fires, causes destruction, causes vandalism or looting and so forth. So the protest can be beneficial, but also it can be harmful. So as a result, and from the point of a Christian, I don't think a protest should be done because it goes back to the beginning of where it all began. A protest can lead someone away from God, but are you protesting against what's right? Or are you protesting against what's good? But a protest of what we understand today is mostly fighting for what we believe is right, but also it can be leading to protest against something that people may see that's wrong, but then that's right, and it can turn into wrong. For example, George Floyd, they did a protest, a peaceful protest, but then it's for a good cause. Yes, these things take place, but then it got violent. So at the end of the day, it's the same spirit that took place in the devil himself. He wanted to do right, thinking he can do right, but as a result, it turned out wrong. Well, he didn't see in his heart that what he was doing was wrong. He saw it as a good way of leading and doing something right, but it didn't work out in his favor. And that's why God is a just God, and he allowed things to this day to play out. So his evil heart, God saw it, but the other angels around him couldn't see. So as a result, what they did was they didn't know who to follow or who to trust. They went with the crowd. That's why you have something called bandwagons. To some degree today, everyone followed the crowd. That's why God said we're supposed to be in the world, but not of the world. We're supposed to be set apart. So a protest is where it began, or which is in heaven. That was the first protest, and it also can start good but end bad.
All right, so piggybacking off of my brother Jamo, we see that the first ever recorded protest in the Bible ever was actually, the protest of God in heaven from Satan, and that was over worship. So, are there any other examples in the Bible of protests over worship? The first example we have that I can talk about would be Moses, protesting in Egypt to Pharaoh about the overall treatment of the Jews and also the the overall worship of God and the religious and civil persecution of the Jews, where he wanted to get them out of slavery. Another example also from Moses is when Moses was coming down from the mount and he saw the Israelites were under the influence of the Egyptians even after being taken out, where they were worshiping the golden calf. He protested by getting angry and also smashing the tablets, the Ten Commandments. Another example we have over a protest of worship was in Daniel chapter 3, where you have the 3 Hebrew men that pretty much made a protest against King Nebuchadnezzar. So how did they protest, and what did that have to do with worship? If you actually look and read that story, you see that King Nebuchadnezzar, he had a law in place due to his pride, which is pretty much the same spirit of Satan, where he had a law pretty much where, when you heard the music playing, you would have to go and bow down to his image.
And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then an herald cried aloud, "To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king hath set up. And whoso falleth not down and worshippeth, shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace."
So we know as a Christian that God is the only true God that we're supposed to bow down to. You're never supposed to bow down to a man or an image. That's the second commandment, that we're not supposed to bow down to any graven image. So the 3 Hebrew men actually made their protest by not bowing down. And we know that anytime they, that you disobeyed that law, there was supposed to be a death decree in order. But they made their stand, regardless of what the consequences would be. Finally, we have another example in Daniel chapter 6, where Daniel was protesting for the worship of God. So how did he do that, and what was he protesting? You would actually see that he was protesting in Babylon against the King Nebuchadnezzar, who passed a law that nobody in his kingdom should worship any god. So what did Daniel do to protest that? You'll see that he actually prayed 3 times a day, but he didn't just do that in a secret prayer closet. He opened up his window and made sure everybody can see him worshiping and praying to God.
Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being open in his chamber toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as he did aforetime.
Is that not a very bold protest? Is that not what we're supposed to be doing as Christians? Like, what lessons can we take from that? You ever heard the song "Dare to be a Daniel and Dare to Stand Alone"? That's what we're supposed to be doing today as Christians. No matter what opposition we're going to receive, we need to always pray to God. We need to always proclaim His promises. We need to live a life truly Christian. So we see also the way Daniel protested. He didn't go outside and scream, or he didn't go outside and do a demonstration. His protest, even though it was bold, it was still silent. He prayed to God so that everybody could see his display of faith even though, you know, there was a death penalty that he could have been facing. So, you know, once again, like, we see these lessons, and, you know, like, we need to not just read these Bible verses and these stories as just like a fairy tale or you know, just something like that, but it should be an example of how we live our lives. So with that being said, we see those three examples that I just gave, and we see that Babylon was pretty much like the first known civilization. So do we see any other examples like that later on in the Bible, not only in the Old Testament, but in the New Testament?
Within the New Testament, we see an individual who went about protesting, who, you may ask, the Lamb of God himself. But how did he go about protesting? Number one, the situation of where Christ goes to the temple of God. However, in this circumstance, he sees merchants buying and selling amongst themselves.
And they come to Jerusalem, and Jesus went into the temple, and began to cast out them that sold and bought in the temple, and overthrew the tables of the money changers, and the seats of them that sold doves, and would not suffer that any man should carry any vessel through the temple. And he taught, saying unto them, Is it not written, My house shall be called of all nations the house of prayer, but ye have made it a den of thieves?
We see that Christ himself going to drive these merchants out. He calls them that you make my Father's house, a house that was primarily made to worship, a house in a den of thieves. Now, the second point that I want to also make out is Christ's life himself. The way that he lived his life was the protest that we all should follow. The life that he showed humility amongst men, healing the leper, and also healing people of the sick and of the blind on the Sabbath day as well. The scribes and the Pharisees did not approve of this, of course, but him living that life was the protest against that system. Isn't that how should we live our life? Like the life of Christ? But however, moving on. We can also look at the life of the Waldenses. How they lived their life is the actual testimony as well too. Pilgrimage, away from the cities, and also secluded from any type of distractions whatsoever. We can also see that they lived their life as a living testimony. Though that the powers may be that were persecuting them, and though that they might be forced into martyrdom, they lived their life to protest against the systematic religious persecution that they were facing. They published publications to the people to shed and show and reveal light onto these people in a world full of darkness. Now, we can also see and call into memory and history of the 95 Theses of Martin Luther. Martin Luther was at first a priest, but he realized the wicked and cruel indulgences that the Catholic Church was actually putting forth, tricking the people and using their set emotions in order to pay their ways out of purgatory, talking to the priests, so on and so forth, asking for sin to another man and thinking that they can forgive sin. It's not biblical. It's not in my Bible, friends. I'm really sure it's not in yours as well too. Now, where else in history can we also see protests? Are they still going on?
The entrance of thy words giveth light, it giveth understanding unto the simple. I opened my mouth and panted, for I longed for thy commandments.
The Bible let us know in the book of Psalms, chapter 94, verse 16, who will rise up for me against the evildoers? Or who will stand up for me against the workers of iniquity? We're seeing here in the history of the Protestant Reformation that God rose up faithful men who stood against the dogmas and the persecution and the evils that promulgated in the Roman system. So we're seeing, piggyback, like my brother Rocky said, that Martin Luther in the 14th century rose up in England, the morning star of the Reformation. Martin Luther was the herald of all reform, not only in England, but for all Christendom. We're also seeing that he was permitted to utter a protest which was never to be silenced. So one of the life work of the great Protestant Martin Luther that I want to focus on is the translation of the Bible. So we're seeing that Martin Luther, he was tasked to translate the Bible to the English language, or to the native tongue of the people at that time in England. So this great work, which was tasked upon Martin Luther, he took it with great force. Even though he was sick, by the grace of God, he was able to go through that. We also see that John Huss and Jerome followed after the work of Martin Luther, because he stood unflinchingly against the evils that promulgated against the church by translating the Bible into the native tongue. It gave Huss and Jerome the ability to pick up not only the Bible, which was translated, or certain parts of the books of the Bible which was translated, but also the manuscripts which was written by Martin Luther. We saw that John Huss, he picked that up, and then later Jerome came and followed him. We also see in France, where atheism and this communistic belief arose, there was a reformer by the name of John Calvin, and out of that came the Huguenots, which was a major part of the Calvinists. These men, because they had access to the Bible, they was able to see the light which shine all about the confusion and the darkness about the system of Rome. So what are we saying here, friends? So long as you have the Bible within your reach, it was sent as a perpetual protest, because the Bible reveals evil. The Bible is a source book, right? It gives light, it reveals darkness. The Bible says in the book of Jude that we should earnestly contend for the faith which was given to the saints. And friends, just like we're seeing now, we're seeing that the powers that be, they're taking advantage of the things that we're seeing in our world. We're seeing that evils are uprising. But as long as you uphold to the Bible truth and you allow that to come in your life, you will see that the protest will never end, which Martin Luther started, and so on it continued in the lives of the true Bible-believing Christian.
So friends, we see in the very beginning and throughout history of mankind that there actually have been protests. In the very beginning, take for example that Lucifer himself protested the mandates and the statutes of God himself and his character. Fast forward more and you see the situation of Christ himself. And the way that he lived his life was an actual protest against the scribes and the Pharisees, against the rulers of darkness in this world. Fast forward even more, you see the situation with Martin Luther and his 95 Theses of the indulgence of the Catholic Church, of the church themselves. And now which brought light to the Protestant Reformation that we have. But how does this deal with the current events that is going on now? What does it all have to deal with? My friends, it has to deal with the worship. Who exactly do you worship? Whether it be idols that you have at home, whether it be the cars that you have. All these protests came about with a form of worship. For we creatures are made to worship. For we were made in God's image to worship God and only God himself. What exactly are you worshiping? Who are you worshiping? What idols is there? You should be worshiping the true and the one living God. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principality and spiritual wickedness in high heavenly places. Now ask yourself, throughout all these chronological situations, is that protest over?
The protest is over.
Brothers and sisters, Luther's protest is over. Is yours. So the protest has been over for 15 years. And I get a bit cheeky here because I challenge my Protestant pastor friends. If there is no more protest, how can there be a Protestant church? Maybe we're all Catholics again.
Really? It's not over. So long as there are two masters, oppositional forces, the protest will still commence. It will still continue on forth. And no matter what oppositional force it is, we worship the one and true living God. And the God that we serve in our house is the Lord Christ Jesus. This is Watchman Media. Like, comment, and subscribe. We have more content available and ready at our disposal. May God bless you and keep you forevermore. Amen. Maranatha.
Fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him that made heaven and earth.